So our starting point was that a recognition that well-being was clearly a matter for policy concern and for concern within schools. There was a lot of pressure on schools to deliver policies and practices focused on well-being. That first quote is from a paper by the Australian Secondary Principals Association. And also a recognition that there was a lot of confusion about what we actually mean by well-being, little or no consensus about what it really means or what it looks like or how to produce it. Recognition theory, why did we use that as a theoretical framing? That was a common interest of myself and Anne Graham, who led the research, which was what brought us together. There are a number of theories of recognition around that could be drawn on. Charles Taylor's approach, the work in schools by Charles Bingham, work also in schools by Debbie Watson and her colleagues, but our particular focus was on the work of Axel Honneth, and I'll just take a couple of slides to explain why and what we were drawing from Honneth. So his concept of the struggle for recognition is based on his study of Hegel, but also as well as the very theoretical work of Hegel, the empirical work of people like G.H. Mead, the central idea that we define and construct ourselves, our identities, our sense of who we are in relation to the other. What Honneth does that I've found particularly fruitful in thinking about all kinds of situations and processes is to distinguish three modes of intersubjective recognition, which he calls in shorthand love, rights and solidarity. By love he's referring to those intimate relationships in which our sense of self develops. By rights he means our recognition of each other is entitled to mutual respect as persons under law. And by solidarity, he's referring to reciprocal mutual esteem for our talents, our contribution to shared values, or at least to mutually compatible values. So it's a theory of individual development, but it's also a theory of social progress, which is seen as the extension of recognition to wider groups in deeper ways, which Honneth sees as driven by struggles, motivated by experiences of misrecognition. So to kind of pull together some of the conclusions from that, well-being was centrally about relationships for both students and teachers, although there's some difference in emphasis. Students talked a lot about their relationships with their parents, whereas teachers didn't mention those very much at all. Although teachers actually talked about teacher-parent relationships, which students didn't really talk about. But student-teacher relationships were seen as key to student well-being, but were getting eclipsed in everyday practice by curriculum pressure and other concerns. So students get used to the experience of not feeling known. They felt more cared for, respected and valued when teachers spent time with them, listened to them and knew them well. That counted for more than getting awards or giving a good report. Recognition of their value was much more in the context of those relationships rather than in those more formal processes. And they also were looking for more opportunities to build relationships with other age cohorts and with adults rather than just within their year group. The recognition categories resonated with both students and teachers, and misrecognition was pretty clearly described in a lot of cases. The categories do appear then to be helpful in thinking critically and specifically about the nature and content of relationships in the school community. respecting and attending to multiple relationships in children's lives seems likely to have positive benefits, especially for children who are marginalised for whatever reason. School culture and environment seem to be critically important, and that culture needs to be sensitive to differences in personality, gender, ethnic and cultural diversity. I would add class in there, I think. But the recognition lens draws attention not only to positive relationships, but also to sites of struggle and the negative effects of misrecognition. So the broad conclusion we drew was about the importance of schools developing a culture of inclusion, connection and recognition with processes and structures that support conversation and reparation, underpinned by respect for the dignity and well-being of children and young people and recognition of their agency, status and voice. Working together was the strongest predictor. Having influence, having choice and having a say with influential people were also strong predictors. Having a voice either in relation to schooling or in relation to activities wasn't a significant predictor of well-being after the other elements were taken into account. So then we kind of tried to explore what was the mechanism and whether recognition had a part to play in that. The data showed us that students who experienced more opportunities for meaningful participation in those 4 modes also received more recognition from others and gave more recognition to others. Students who experienced more recognition in those ways also reported greater well-being. So there was a mediated connection between participation, recognition and well-being, as well as a direct link between participation and well-being. And those results applied regardless of gender, cultural background, disability or year group of the pupils. So when you actually combined the direct effect and the mediated one, we're predicting more than 3/4 of the measured variation in well-being with that model, 77%. So again, that's the non-statistical representation of that. So it seemed to us that there are some practical implications for schools in that. It appears that effective participation has a payoff in enhanced well-being. This is in large measure due to improved relationships of recognition, mutual relationships. It's pretty clear that voice is not enough. Real choice, real influence, and above all working together count for much more.